Hello, everyone. I'm just chilling in my kitchen after a really long, hard term of work at school. And I thought it would be nice actually to share some, I would say, tougher questions that I've been asked about and generally encountered in regards to Islam and how I have approached these questions. I say tough questions because they're questions that aren't necessarily the most immediate questions that a person might have, but they aren't super obscure ones. And I'm afraid to say that I don't think many people could necessarily provide answers to them. And I'm not saying that my answers, like they're just my opinions, will fully cover all of these beyond reasonable doubt. But you can be the judge here. I hope that my perspectives help inform you. And well, let's just get straight to it and look at these tougher questions. So the first question that I have encountered really is aren't non-religious people more intelligent than religious people? Ergo, following a religion isn't particularly smart. And there are several ways that I would approach this question or this assertion, if you like. So to begin with, the intellect itself is morally neutral. We can think of plenty of people who have had a very strong intellect, but whose morality wouldn't stand up to most human systems of morality. So political theorists such as Vladimir Lenin, dictators like Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot, others whose ideas have killed millions, serial killers like Ted Bundy and Harold Shipman, very, very intelligent. Con men like Victor Lustig, who never owned the Eiffel Tower but sold it to multiple people at the same time, incredibly intelligent. So intelligence itself is not the same as wisdom or judgment or perceptiveness. So I wouldn't necessarily expect more intelligent people to necessarily be more God conscious. But more importantly, if we're going to argue that intelligence decreases faith and religiosity, the reasons given must themselves be intelligent, not just the person in a general way. And this is very important because clever people believe really stupid things. In fact, almost anything, no matter, or almost anyone, no matter how smart they are, when it comes to other fields of human knowledge which they have not specifically studied, particularly things like history and theology, the stuff that they will come up with is incredibly misinformed and usually just childish, no matter how otherwise intelligent we would consider them to be. So I'll give an example as a bit of a pet hate, for example. So this is why, for instance, when 99% of people talk about, let's say, World War II, right? Again, even so-called very smart, educated people, they'll talk utter rubbish, complete rubbish. Right? So you'll hear things like, which you probably think are true, like the Russians outnumbered the Germans vastly in the Second World War, that the Russians just gunned down millions of their own men, just like an enemy at the gates just for running away, that the Russian winter was actually what defeated the Germans, that Hitler could have won the war if only he did X, Y, and Z, that Britain almost was invaded by the Germans, that the Americans saved everyone in the nick of time. Utter rubbish. Complete, utter rubbish. Read some proper history, see some links below. So likewise, the stuff that otherwise clever individuals come up with about religion is also just nonsense. So for instance, the tropes about the church and how the church hated science, would burn scientists by the hundred, and witches as well, by the way. The church actually didn't pursue witch hunts. That was actually the secular authorities, and it also happened after the medieval period anyway. And Muslims sometimes join in with this, by the way, and they think that it makes Islam look better by contrast somehow, which it doesn't, by the way. It just encourages people to think that religion in general is really malign and just should no longer exist. So people, however educated they are, generally have very little understanding as to what religions, including Islam, actually teach and stand for. They have very little understanding as to their history, as to their scriptures, as to the traditional role of concepts like symbolism and metaphor as well. So, you'll have people like David Attenborough, who is a great man, by the way, who'll say that, religious scripture, I guess he's thinking of the Bible, but he'll say religious scripture, everyone took it literally before, Darwinism forced them into metaphorical interpretations. Again, clearly doesn't know the history of Catholicism. Completely false. Then, of course, on a similar note, Western liberal society with its, it sounds harsh, but cultural nihilism generally teaches people, and I know I'm a teacher, that history is for the most part essentially evil. That people, except for maybe the ancient Greeks, I still love the ancient Greeks, that people before the so-called Renaissance or Enlightenment were essentially backward, dirty, they threw their sewage out of the window, illiterate, smelt of rotting vegetables, they never had a bath, they hated women, all stuff which makes medieval enthusiasts like myself actually really cringe. So the thing is, a so-called intelligent person is actually a lot more likely to absorb what they're taught, right? So more intelligent people are going to listen to the teacher more, they're going to revise more, they're going to absorb more of what they're taught. So in some sense, one's intelligence might actually make them better at absorbing the myths. And also let's just consider different people across countries for a moment. Who is likely to be more religious? An Egyptian doctor or professor, or a British high school dropout who failed all their exams? Well, generally the former, who is likely to be by any metric really more intelligent. So the difference here did not come from intelligence, but or education for that matter, but other things like societal norms and so on. Now, it should be admitted, however, that in a largely religious society, quite often the minority of irreligious people, yes, they are going to be found in the higher level of intelligence and education brackets, though I think this is due to a number of other things. For example, like they're just more likely to have exposure to secular norms and ideas via the internet, via international dealings, etc. But in a very non-religious society, such as the UK where I live, the opposite might be true. And a greater level of critical thought should actually allow people to question the very secular norms, such as all the myths of history and religion, which I've related to you earlier. And I mean, when I was teaching actually at a Catholic school in Britain, the more religious pupils were absolutely far more represented in the higher ability classes than the very low ability classes. Again, that's just anecdotal, but that was my experience. And most of my religious friends, most of whom are professionals, many of them are doctors, are definitely far more intelligent than the average person, I guess. And in the meantime, there is a very common uneducated, even anti-intellectual atheism as well. They're not all smart middle class graduates like like the likes of Richard Dawkins. Also imagine your quintessential 40-something-year-old man in a pub, putting the world to right, grumbling about, how religion starts all wars and how God can't be real because his dog died. However, though, there are some reasons. There are some reasons. I've alluded to one already, but there are some reasons why otherwise intelligent people are irreligious. So, as I kind of alluded to before, really, they will absorb more of what they're taught, and they will retain more of what they're taught, which is in Western society, secularism and liberalism. And, even if they're not from Western society, with complete globalization, they are invariably going to be exposed to these things a lot more, especially with English as the global lingua franca. So they will make links. That's another thing. Intelligent people will make links. They will make links and they will come to the logical conclusions of what they are taught. And speaking of what they are taught, universities are also full of Marxist, leftist, and socialist professors as well. And I'm not saying that all their ideas are wrong, by the way, but they do tend to have a considerable bias against religion, as well as non-leftist ideas. And it then becomes self-fulfilling. So people are less likely to go into this sort of academia unless they have signed their name on the dotted lines. They're less likely to be successful as well. And let's remember, groupthink amongst intellectuals is still groupthink. A great book that I can recommend for this actually is a book called Intellectuals and Society. I'll put the link below, written by Thomas Sowell. And I don't agree with him on everything actually, but when he describes how intellectuals, and he gives a specific definition for intellectuals, he doesn't just mean educated people, but he explains very clearly how intellectuals plus power so overwhelmingly frequently leads, or would lead, were they given more power, to absolute disaster. Okay, so that's question one. I've rambled on that one quite a bit. Okay, so question number two then is, aren't non-religious societies much better than than religious ones? And much happier too. So, you know, the North Germanic countries in particular, so Scandinavia, I guess also Holland and Germany as well. Aren't these just better countries? They are quite irreligious, yet they do really well in world happiness rankings. They have really high human development indexes. They have very low crime rates, yet their justice system isn't particularly harsh, really. So, you know, the logical conclusion, you know, surely religion's not necessary, or actively makes, you know, worse societies even. So here's my take on it. Again, I've got a few perspectives. So firstly, I wouldn't necessarily expect so-called religious societies to always be better in the sense of more prosperous. So a country which has more money, for example, like Norway, which is really rich due to North Sea oil investments and a bit of weapons dealing, would probably provide more for its citizens. And I don't think morality is always necessary for that. And I'm not saying Norway isn't moral, by the way, but even a self-interested, amoral politician or civil servant could have selfish reasons, namely their careers, for providing good, beneficial things to society, like welfare, environmental protections, and you know, just laws. Of course, there are lots of instances where the opposite is true, including in the Muslim world, where one's political career is at odds with what is moral, and often the politician acts in the interest of their political career. So it can work with both ways, but I also don't think that you know, non-Muslims and non-Muslim societies should or would be devoid of redeeming features necessarily. I mean, all people are born with a disposition to believe or act as if they believe in the reality of God, even people who claim to be non-believers. I mean, my opinion, I'm sidetracking a bit, but my opinion, which doesn't really count for that much, is I guess in agreement with the theologians who would suggest that many, maybe even most people, are to some or almost unreached, if you like, by Islam. So, you know, they might have heard of the concept, but that they don't know anything meaningful about it. They think it is essentially a culture, or they just know negative things about it. So there's not an obvious reason why non-Muslim societies should be bad. And in fact, when we think about some of these much vaunted happy countries, let's say Sweden, Norway, Denmark, with, you know, high development indexes, where did this actually come from? Well, these systems of social welfare, you know, which seem so great in these places, they came from Christianity. So still revelation. And I mean, in fact, the Scandinavian welfare system is directly based on Lutheran Christianity. Yes, the people may have largely abandoned the theological part of it, but they can see that it works, so they continue with it. It's also worth noting, really, that many of these so-called happy countries aren't actually as happy as a survey would suggest. I'm told that many Danes and Finns see these happiness surveys as a bit of a joke, really, because they measure things like how much faith do you have in your systems, institutions, satisfaction with these institutions, etc. So not necessarily a measure of joy, right? You know, you're more likely to see joy, you know, outward joy in Latin America or Egypt. These places don't necessarily have as good a happiness ratings because people will say, you know, our police are corrupt, our politicians are horrible, etc. But there's certainly a lot more kind of warmth and happiness on a personal level. And I mean, many of these so-called great non-religious societies, they still have, paradoxically, rather high suicide rates, very high divorce rates, very high uses of antidepressants. And as for being, you know, by implication, you know, that as for being more moral countries, that's not so clear cut either. I mean, let's not talk about, you know, things like sexual morality and conservatism here, which, you know, people just differ on a lot, whether they're religious or not. But you know, things that we can all agree with. So, you know, Norway and Sweden, for example, right? They might not have a hawkish intervention policy, but they are amongst the largest weapons dealers in the world. And these Nordic countries actually have rather high levels of xenophobia as well. So, and also, even though many of these countries are domestically quite peaceful, you know, they've got low levels of antisocial behavior in general. They also have many laws, a lot more monitoring of people. Whereas in Muslim majority countries, even politically unstable ones, you still have very low rates of murder, very low rates of antisocial behavior, rather like that of the first world countries, even though we don't have the same kind of systems like policing and monitoring place. Let's be honest, most Muslim countries don't really have very functional police systems. And I mean, I would ask you, with any of these, you know, non-religious first world countries that everybody thinks are so great, what would happen if you took away the police, took away much of the wealth, took away many of the things that just keep people occupied, aka their screens, take away most of the state welfare as well? Okay, in other words, make them more like more like second or third world countries, and see what happens then. I'm not so sure that they'd be so peaceful and crime free after all. And look, I'm not attacking these countries by any stretch. I respect what they've achieved, and I'm also really embarrassed, I guess, by the corruption that we see in many parts of the Muslim world, like Pakistan, for example. But yeah, these so-called great countries, they are not utopias, or if they are, then I will insist that the following is true: one utopia is another man's dystopia. Right, I've rambled on this one as well. The answers to the other questions are a bit less rambly, but a great book that I can recommend on this subject, actually, about some of these, you know, great, so-called great countries, is a book called The Nearly Perfect People, and see the description in the link below. I should also point out too that wealth and comfort is a test. So those living in countries which have achieved that might be being tested. It's tempting to forget God when you're supposedly safe and secure and have a high quality of life. Something which you know, our brothers and sisters in the Gulf states, which are now very rich in particular, should be very wary of, actually, with the next generation. Anyway, that's just some rambling thoughts on that one. Next tough question. How can you believe in hell in the 21st century? So, okay, I take a little bit of issue with this kind of, woke phrase, the 21st century. It's also Friday at 9 p.m. Like, what does that actually mean? The 21st century, so what? But okay, a more charitable interpretation of this, most people don't word it that articulately, but I like to phrase my opponent's arguments as well as I can, would be something like this. With modern knowledge and wisdom, we know that harm and inflicting pain is bad. There's no benefit to it. It can't be philosophically justified. The concept of reward and punishment, after death, particularly punishment, really just looks like a man-made way to control people. I guess that is what is implicitly being said. So let's consider that carefully, and let's consider all of our opponents' arguments carefully, right? I mean, I don't believe in kind of just point scoring or debunking them to satisfy people who watch my videos. Like, I want to engage with them properly. So before we get into the specifics of what hell is supposed to represent and the specifics of the objections, so, like the description in physical graphic terms, burning, for instance, and that the duration is, ostensibly seems to be forever. Let's just take a few steps back. The concept of retribution in the next plane of existence is in itself not inherently unjust, right? I mean, it's in essence the idea that that wrongs will be righted, that wrongdoers who seemed to escape scot-free after causing loads of injustice and misery on earth will be called to account. They won't truly get off scot-free, whereas in a universe with no afterlife, they basically would. But okay, maybe in principle people might concede this point, okay, but it's the specifics, that trouble people, and Muslims too, by the way. Let's be quite honest with that, particularly in, again, more Western societies. This idea, why would God torture people, endlessly, seemingly for crimes which modern society would hardly recognize as well, like worshipping other gods, for example. Surely it's not even harming people. So, okay, before I give my take, and it is only my take, on problems like the problem of an everlasting punishment, or the problem with, kind of very physical punishment, let's look at the possible options that a religion could have in regards to life after death. So option number one would basically be that there is no life after death, right? There's non-existence, you die and you just cease to exist. And this is pretty pointless to follow. So some people, like actually the pre-Islamic pagans of Mecca, might kind of follow this religion to get some short-term benefit in this life here and now. But on the whole, people are not going to follow or give much credence to this. I mean, what's the point? Possibility number two is that there is an afterlife, there is a paradise, and everyone goes to it, no matter what. So again, nobody's going to feel compelled to follow this. There's no need to teach this religion to your kids. I mean, why does it matter, really? And again, it will soon be forgotten. Possibility number three is that there is a paradise for those who do good, for those who do whose evil deeds outweigh the good deeds. They will cease to exist after they die. So this is a little bit more compelling, because if you're good, you get rewarded. If you are evil, you in some sense get punished, right? You cease to exist, so you can no longer enjoy pleasures. But for someone who really wants to do wrong, or just to enjoy life with no responsibility, really, the stakes really aren't high enough, right? YOLO, right? I'm going to have my fun here and now. So the fourth possibility, this is that there is a hell, so there is punishment, there is a paradise, but it's irrespective of one's beliefs. It's just doing good. And I'll talk about the problem of good later on as well, actually. I'll talk about it a bit now, actually. The thing is, what is good? That changes quite a lot with no real anchorage. So, for example, in the 1930s and 40s, it would be good in Japan to join in with the brutalizing, the rape, the terrorizing, as they did in China. Not many people realize the Japanese killed far more people than the Nazis killed in the Holocaust. They worked prisoners to death, sent them on death marches, tortured them, and that was considered perfectly in line with society. It wasn't just a few psychopaths in the military doing this. So yeah, what is good, what is so-called good, varies quite a lot. And again, I think that people would soon forget or regard this doctrine. Essentially, they can just say, "I am good because I say so. Ergo, I deserve to go to paradise." So the penultimate possibility, second last possibility, is that there is a paradise for those who do good. There is actually punishment. There is a hell for those who do bad, but the hell has very, very clear boundaries. So maybe it is clearly temporary, or maybe it's just a place of regret. It's like a hospital to be purified before heaven. So a soft doctrine of hell, essentially. And again, like number two, I think like number three, like the non-existence one, if you do bad deeds, the stakes really aren't high enough for people who want to do bad things, right? I'll take my chances. Maybe this religion is not true anyway. Even if it is, the punishment appears relatively mild. Then there's the final possibility, which is that there is a paradise for those who do good, and there is a hell for those who do bad. And this time the hell is described in very harsh terms, and at least at face value appears to be indefinite in punishment, right? Now, only option 5 would be compelling to most people throughout history. Anything else, and people will find a reason or excuse, given that we are flawed beings, to disregard and forget about the faith. No one will take it seriously, or it would fail to spread in the first place, or it would turn into a dead, superfluous religion like Christianity in the West has basically allowed itself to be. And you have to remember, for the people to whom the Qur'an was revealed, and almost everybody else, right, and since in human history, actually, they have had a much, much closer relationship with death and pain than in modern liberal Western society. They would have suffered numerous pains from work, exposure to the climate, violence, torture, hunger, much more so than we can imagine. So to have any real resonance, a divine punishment couldn't be seen as weaker than any of those things that people have endured firsthand. Otherwise, it's really just a case of, okay, I've been that, I've done that, I've endured that punishment. I'm not really scared. And furthermore, as well, in an age of blood feuds and retribution and much greater interpersonal violence, the idea of divine judgment actually gives people less incentive to pursue extreme acts of revenge. So, if somebody's wronged you, they'll receive their judgment anyway. And yes, we should still carry out some justice, but mostly minimizing harm. And we certainly don't need to inflict gratuitous harm and pain onto others, even if we think they somehow deserve it, because God knows who is deserving or not. But okay, fine. The problem remains. Surely in a kinder age, if this age is really a kinder age, but let's go with it. Can't we see that these kind of punishments are essentially cruel and unusual and gratuitous tortures? Well, okay, my original point still stands. Only strong deterrents in this regard are really meaningful to the common person. And I know that you do sometimes hear people that say, I left Islam because of hell, or I won't become a Muslim because of hell. But I feel that this is often rather disingenuous, actually, that quite often the person would have left anyway, maybe even sooner, actually. But even if this is the case, many more people have stayed or stayed within certain boundaries regarding their behavior because of the doctrine. But, deterrent or not, how is it justifiable? And how is, right, God is supposed to be merciful. So mercy surely means providing help and relief even when it's not deserved. So personally, and again, this is only my opinion, but personally, I think and hope, I would say hope more than think, that the more merciful and esoteric even ideas are going to be the closest to the truth. I hope and pray that anyway. So there've been scholars like Al-Ghazali who seems to say that real unbelief or kufr is really covering the truth when the truth has been made absolutely clear, which you could argue it hasn't necessarily for most people. So they won't be automatically damned. Or others like Ibn Qayyim, who suggests that forever in regard to punishment means something more like infinite, so it goes on but isn't literally without end. And that end itself, maybe hell is destroyed with its inhabitants, or maybe becomes habitable, or its inhabitants are taken into paradise. I mean, God knows best, right? I also like Muhammad Asad's interpretation when he talks about divine punishment and quotes classical scholars like Razi, who talk in terms of the punishment really being self-inflicted. So it's a culmination of what the person has done to their own soul, more than an external punishment that we often imagine, but punishment is still there. And it's an interesting topic. I mean, for more discussion and some books that I found really useful, see some links below for that as well. And God only knows, but I think that as long as people don't outright deny the possibility of accountability for their deeds, we should give people some flexibility to spiritually and intellectually tackle these questions without forcing a particular interpretation on them. So some people, it benefits them to believe to believe a more kind of harsher doctrine to keep them on the straight and narrow. Others find solace in interpretations that I guess seem more merciful to them, and I guess that's okay. I mean, again, it's just my opinion. I sometimes read and see comments from Muslims who kind of argue or attack other Muslims who again favor one of these, I guess, more merciful or esoteric ideas about hell. So they not denying that hell is real, but they're allowing more room for things like metaphor. And then these people will be like, okay, are you saying that Allah lies? Are you saying that God lies? But I say let God handle his own truth. I mean, symbolism isn't lying, right? I mean, giving stark warnings and then showing mercy at the end isn't lying, right? I'm a science teacher and I give my pupils warnings about burning or scalding themselves all the time, and loads of anecdotes, most of which I've just made up, about people in the past being taken to hospital, etc. And how many of my pupils have burnt themselves? None, thanks to the warnings. So let's leave it to God in regard to those warnings, whilst taking them very seriously, but asking for and hoping for mercy. And there's no point denying God. It's self-defeating, actually. I mean, if his punishment exists, it exists, whether you turn to him or not. So open your heart. And if you aren't sure about God, just pray for his mercy. And if you're not even sure he is a reality, what have you got to lose, right? For any non-Muslims or struggling Muslims who are watching this, would a man trapped on a desert island not be rational to wave and make signals, even if he didn't know whether anybody would come to rescue him? So open your heart, and even if you've never done it before, just before you go to bed, just say a quick prayer. Okay, so the next question is, I wouldn't say this is as tough actually, but it's one some people ask. So this is in regard to Islam allowing 4 wives. Sure, this is immoral. It's kind of oppressive. You're keeping these women as property, etc. Well, the first thing to say is I don't really think Islam kind of endorses the idea that you should be having multiple wives. It really just limited the existing number to 4. And, the situation to have multiple wives is not, Islam is not saying it is universally desirable, right? It's not inherently outdated, right? Because in most places now there isn't so much of a skewed female to male ratio because there's less war and violence on the whole. There are also other means for women to meet their needs regarding welfare and so on, and more women have an expectation of monogamy. So I'm not, and I don't think Islam is really arguing for more and more people to have multiple marriages, but I do take issue with modern people who seem to argue that it is somehow inherently wrong. I mean, liberals don't really have an issue with open relationships or relations with multiple partners. And so yeah, all of that is fine. But as soon as you start giving those multiple partners additional stability and not just physical relations, that's, i.e. you marry them, that's somehow wrong. It doesn't really make sense. And look, what if you had a situation where there were two women, to each man, and some of these ladies had children, and there was no welfare system or any real ways for them to meet their needs? Why would it be wrong for some of the men to meet their needs, protection, companionship, and so on? And also, what if you needed to build relations with an otherwise hostile tribe? Marriage has always been a way to achieve this, and it did achieve that. I guess in parts of the world it still achieves that. So what are liberals saying that they wish Islam was more strict and dogmatic so that it could fit this particular modern situation right now? It doesn't really make sense. And there are different types of love, like even within romantic love. So the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, was completely monogamous for 25 or so years before the death of his wife. And it was only following after her death that he did marry multiple women, most of whom had been previously married. And this was for the sake of providing for them and also to strengthen existing political bonds and make peace. I mean, what's wrong with that? Okay, the next question is in regards to Islam and punishments. So it asks, why does Islam offer such harsh punishments? Surely these punishments are essentially outdated, and if God is real and revelation is real, surely God should have kind of foreseen these kind of punishments, such as, chopping the hands off thieves. That's a famous one. Would be obsolete. Now, I think Muslims quite often get this wrong when in terms of how they give justification for this. So what I quite often hear is something like, okay, there is so much wisdom in these punishments because these punishments, yes, they are really harsh, but they act as a deterrent. But this explanation is missing something. The punishments, in the Qur'an at least for their time, not very harsh at all. So we take something like theft. In Britain, this was punished, not just theoretically, but in practice and with frequency. Theft, even petty theft, was punished by death until way into the 19th century. And I mean, by contrast, this is, post-Renaissance, post-Enlightenment, right? I mean, hundreds of people are being killed at this period of time, executed for theft. Whereas with the Quran, the interpretation from a much harsher time than 19th century Britain is typically, regarding theft, is typically that a professional thief, so stealing for luxury, not necessity, who's unrepentant, who's caught red-handed, and his guilt is beyond all reasonable doubt, would lose his means of theft his hand. Now, there are other modernist interpretations, which I don't really know enough about to really judge. So interpretations saying that cutting off hands can also mean cutting off their means and their ability to steal, whatever that might mean, or that, the person's hand could be cut, like marked, to mark them as a thief, not necessarily amputated. And I'm no scholar to judge these, arguably modernist interpretations. I'm just putting it out there that they exist. But let's stick to the traditional interpretations for purposes of this, I guess. Well, most Muslims aren't really arguing for lots more people to lose their hands, right? I mean, there has been a long-standing tradition, right from the start, of warding off these harsher punishments with ambiguity, often commuting them to much lighter ones. And, in many cases, carrying out these sentences was de facto not possible because all the requirements were not met. And if you look at some some scholarly works and what some jurists have said, you look at it and think, okay, it is literally impossible to actually go through with this and cut somebody's hand off. When you look at just how many requirements they sometimes wish, some of them are just ridiculous. You're like, nobody's going to lose their hands. But the law remains in principle to emphasize the severity and damage of these crimes. And these crimes are harmful, and they would have been much, much more harmful in an age where just about everybody was only a few possessions short of being completely destitute. And you can take pity on a thief, but you yourself, you would be after their blood if they took away your means to feed your children. So, if people want to argue that there are not many, or even that there are no situations at this present point where, removing the hand of a thief would be appropriate, well, okay, you could make a case for that. I mean, a lot of Islamic scholars would agree with you. It would certainly be very complex. Would the thief be able to get a prosthetic hand? Would they get a disability payment? But to argue that something like this is inherently harsh or immoral or outdated, just by virtue of the date, that shows a lack of understanding of history and of how societies have functioned. Also, if there wasn't some reasonably significant punishment for theft, either you would have lots of theft and the society would be in chaos, or people, and this is more likely, or people would take matters into their own hands and they would resort to the much more brutal, typical forms of retribution, things like execution, blinding, things like violence against not just a person, but the person's kin. Okay, I've talked about that one for a while. Actually, just another one just before we move on. Okay, not many people know this actually. Like your average non-Muslim doesn't know this, but a lot of non-Muslims on the internet seem to know this, that the Quran mentions crucifixion. And it mentions it in the context of various crimes like corruption, like spreading war and chaos through the land. Now, again, I'm not a scholar to judge interpretations and commentary, but the commentary which I have found the most compelling is from Muhammad Asad, and he said, and he's not the only one, but he said that the Quran is at no point actually prescribing the punishment of crucifixion. It mentions other things like people losing their, hands and legs, basically. The Quran is not actually prescribing these as punishment. What it is saying is that the if you like, effect of living through violence and corruption and living by the sword is that invariably these kind of things, such as dismemberment, such as death, such as being exiled, all of these things that are mentioned together, that these are the consequences which people like this face. It's not actually endorsing these as bespoke punishments for us to inflict. Okay, so the next question is why can't Muslims accept LGTB? So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, right? Love is love. You don't choose who you love. Why can't Muslims just accept this? Now, in a way, I really can't answer this question, right? Because if I say anything deemed to not be in line with the LGTB agenda, as I am someone who works in education, and it is called the LGTB agenda, by the way. I'm not just using the phrase agenda as, you know, hyperbole or to sound like a conspiracy theorist. It is referred to as the LGTB agenda. But if I say anything that is even deemed to not be in line with this, I will lose my job. Right? I'm sorry. Okay. And the fact that I care for and cherish my LGTB students just as much as anybody else, and that I would never tolerate any cruelty or discrimination towards them, it won't make a difference, right? I mean, I've even had some trans students come out, if you like, to me first and foremost, to explain that, you know, they feel that they are in the wrong gender. And I'm pretty sure they knew that I'm Muslim, and probably knew that Muslims are more likely to have conservative views about things like sexuality. But they did it not because they thought I'd be a frequenter of, you know, gay pride parades or anything like that, but just based on trust. Anyway, none of that would matter. I'd lose my job. You know, I could save the life of a gay or trans person, and I would lose my job for saying anything that sounds like it doesn't align with the current LGTB agenda. And you think this is hyperbole, right? A few weeks ago, a Christian chaplain at a school lost his job for giving a speech, you can see the link below, on why Christians should tolerate people with different views, right? I said should tolerate people with different views. Over here, the different views by implication would be views about LGTB, of course. And just the insinuation that he wasn't in agreement with these views not only cost him his livelihood, but he was referred to Prevent as being a possible terror suspect. Okay. In the end, of course, Prevent just threw it out, but he was referred to them and he lost his livelihood for that. Right. But so I can't really give any opinions here. But I will say a couple of things, speaking for most of the practicing Muslims who I know. They don't follow the Western understanding of being homophobic, i.e., somebody who has a problem with homosexuality and gay people, right? I mean, the term homophobic is usually referred to mean somebody who has a problem with both the lifestyle and the people. But I guess most of these Muslims would get labeled as such. Now, the thing is, they don't expect non-Muslims to follow Islamic norms, like Islamic norms on sexuality, but they have a holistic way of life, right? So not just like a religion on the side that just gets in the way of stuff. And part of that holistic way of life is that they believe that sexual intercourse is to be between two people of opposite gender within a marriage. So do they have a problem with people who are attracted to those of the same sex? Well, no, it's just an urge. It's not a sin. It's just a feeling. Does it mean that they have a problem with people who practice homosexuality? Not usually, right? No more than they have a problem with people who just live with partners and have kids with partners outside of marriage. I mean, that's outside Islamic norms as well, right? But again, we don't, not we, they, other practicing Muslims, can't talk about myself, don't expect non-Muslims to follow these theological norms. But again, these Muslims themselves, they will not toe the line and say that they believe that same-gender intercourse is theologically permissible. And why should they? Like, why should Muslims get with your times, so to speak? Why do you even care what they believe? I mean, you know, as long as they don't harm anybody, right? You know, that's what liberals always talk about, you know, do what you want as long as it doesn't harm anybody, right? And it's amazing how liberals who talk about diversity can't tolerate the diversity of opinion, which extends to even passively not believing that same gender intercourse is a good, desirable thing. And okay, that's all I'll say on this for now. No, actually, there's something else that I must add, actually, and this is for any Muslim parent, as I'm a parent myself, and I would want to be told. Your children, if they go to a British school, probably other Western schools as well, but if they go to a British school, and again, I'm not putting any value judgments on this, as I've said before, right? Your children will not just be told that gay people exist, or that gay people and trans people, etc., exist and should not suffer harm or discrimination. They will be told that your gender is a choice, right? That it's flexible, that there are many genders, that heteronormativity is wrong, that it is problematic that hetero is the norm. Your teachers will be told, their teachers will be told not to call the children boys and girls or ladies and gentlemen anymore, because some people choose not to have a gender. They will be told that they can be gay, but by this they mean practice homosexuality and be Muslim and be Christian, right? Because religion must get with the times, right? Some people might argue that that's code for disappear with the times, but there you go. And you as a parent, you won't get told in advance about this. They won't give you a means of withdrawing your child, right? Not without a fight. It's not like sex education in science, where you get a letter asking for your consent, whether you can let your child watch this video about where babies come from. Okay, you can back out of that. Okay. Or you can back out of RS because schools don't really care about it anyway, and loads of RS teachers are about as theologically versed as your average taxi driver or bartender. But you can't pull your child out of this. Okay, you won't get given the option. And your child is not just going to be told this in a once a week, half-hour, box ticking session for the inspectors about citizenship. No, this agenda is to incorporate this throughout the entire curriculum across multiple subjects. Okay, so in maths, you might learn statistics about how many LGTB people suffer bullying, for example. In science, you will probably hear about the sexuality of certain scientists, etc., who weren't heterosexual, and so on. So what's my opinion on this? What advice can I give? Well, I can't. Okay, I haven't given a value judgment on the agenda. I haven't revealed any state secrets that I shouldn't, by the way, right? This curriculum just exists. I've not disclosed any documents. So maybe for your purposes, maybe I agree with all of it. Or maybe I just don't want to lose my job and I've got a daughter to feed. Okay, so the next question asks, why can't religion just ask you to be a good person? Right? Or I guess, why isn't a good person being enough? Right? Why does belief matter? What's wrong with worshipping the wrong God, or none? So my answer here might sound like a bit of a lawyer's answer, actually, and it is this. Listen to the full answer. Listen to the full answer. Being a good person is enough. Okay. The Qur'an even says that none will have hell but the wicked. But part of goodness is sincerity. And sincerity includes accepting the truth once it has been made compelling. As for worshipping other gods, here's the thing. The moment because of course the problem here is that people will say, well, surely God is, jealous if he punishes you for worshipping another god, he's like a spoilt 3-year-old, etc. And then of course the believer will usually reply and say, well, no, of course God isn't jealous, and they've not really given a convincing reason why he isn't. Okay. But here's the thing. The moment that you worship anything besides God, or if you participate in rituals which are mostly superstition, so as like the Quran gives the example of slitting the ears of cattle, for example, as a superstition, you put a barrier between other people and the worship of the divine. You make the path more obscure for others. So it's not a victimless crime. Whenever people who I know often, criticize, superstition. So, faith healing or tarot cards or fortune telling or whatever. They will almost by implication at some point shift towards saying or implying that religion in general, okay, so they'll go from these little superstitions and extend that to religion in general as being, superstitious, etc. Superstitious, irrational, even though these things weren't actually part of a mainstream religion. And what is goodness anyway, right? I mean, is goodness just following the, I guess, godless version of Christianity, right? That is basically the code of conduct for 21st century Western society. The thing is, if a religion just said, just be good, right, and even gave some descriptors, it would still be forgotten pretty soon. Right? People can assure themselves very easily that they are good, right? Lots of people say to me, I don't believe in God, but I'm good, right? But who says, right? Have you saved any starving people that I don't know about? Who are you to say that you are good and that your good is somehow sufficient in the cosmic order of things? I'd say that I'm not even sure if I am good, like in the scale of the cosmos. I am a force for good. I don't know. But I'm definitely better for having a theological anchor for the way that I live. So yeah, you can't just call yourself a great guy because you've not grievously injured anybody and say that, if God exists, he would be obliged to put you into paradise. I mean, who says you're good? Again, right? Chances are you are consuming lots of the earth's resources, you're producing waste, you have definitely turned your back on a million opportunities to help other people. Who says you're good anyway? Right, the next question. Do you want Islam to take over? So that's a good question, because the implicit conclusion is that if my answer is yes, then my Islam is actually a threat to the West. It is. And if the answer is no, well, surely, the person doesn't really regard that religion that much if they don't want everybody to follow it. So here's my take on this. In some sense, the answer is yes. But what I don't want is for people from the Muslim, I don't want it to be because people from the Muslim world, just quickly reverse the demographics of the Western world via mass immigration and replace its indigenous cultures, something that, the far right, fear quite a lot. And I'm looking forward to doing some videos actually where I talk about issues to do with the far right and, how we can actually have in some ways actually quite a few points of agreement and solidarity. But anyway, so anyway, yeah. What I don't want is for the, Muslim world to somehow, reverse the demographics of the Western world and in that way make the Western world Muslim. I mean, with culture, I mean, as long as it doesn't actually go against the principles of Islam, it's all good, right? I mean, some might argue sacred because our different cultures are signs from God, right? So I'd love, Italians to convert to Islam, but I wouldn't want Italians to essentially Arabize, if that's a real word, themselves, or stop eating pizza, or stop communicating 50% by gestures. I mean, I'm English, right? And on a deep level, it can be a challenge for me to click with people who aren't culturally English or British. So I'd love more English people to convert to Islam, but I don't want them to give up complaining about the weather or politely forming long queues or having an ironic, deadpan sense of humor. No, I want that stuff to stay. So yeah, I don't know if you have, kind of, I guess, far right leanings or genuine fear that, Muslims are out to change the demographics of Western society dramatically. I don't know. I'm not one. I have no such intention anyway. Okay. Next question. Hasn't science, especially evolution, essentially buried God? So actually all my post-16 studies really have been in the sciences. plus some maths as well. And I find much less of a problem than many Muslims have, actually. And in short, my view is that God can create by whatever means he wants. Right? And I know it's a long discussion, actually. But yeah, in short, I would say that God can create by whatever means he wants. And if we do want to annoy a little bit, and we shouldn't annoy too much, we shouldn't annoy other people too much. I really can't stand, kind of point scoring dawah carriers. Not other people, point scoring dawah, not people. And it doesn't really soften any hearts or endear people. But right, I'm rambling a bit. But if we kind of want to annoy a little bit, militant, kind of atheist who's big on evolution, just agree with everything they say, and say that, well, yeah, God did that. Right? God did that. Okay, well, such and such law of nature, or this animal evolved like this. Oh, okay, thank you. God did that. And in fact, thank you very much for actually sharing the details with me as to how God did do that. You've helped my faith out here. Thank you. And for me, it's the same really with other aspects of science. And I would actually say that more recent paradigms in science have definitely been more harmonious with faith-based notions. The Big Bang, for example, largely conceived of by a Catholic priest, Georges Lemaitre, and enthusiastically accepted by the then Pope. That was furiously opposed by secular scientists like the British scientist Fred Hoyle, for example, because it seemed too religious, right? The universe coming into being, right? It seemed too gaudy, right? Religious. And then things like the multiverse theory, something that is often used to explain away the apparent fine-tuning of the universe. The multiverse theory is the idea that there are billions of other universes out there, so it's not so miraculous that this universe is fine-tuned for chemistry to be coherent, etc., because there are billions of other ones. Well, this is literally belief with no evidence whatsoever, and I don't think it's irrational. Actually, I don't think it's irrational to speculate that there might be other universes. But it is irrational according to the mantra that one should only believe if they have empirical evidence for it, which a lot of atheists claim to hold. And it doesn't even get rid of God, right? I mean, God could have created other universes. And what's more, given that the laws of physics the laws of quantum physics don't literally exclude events that we would term as miraculous. They only render them highly improbable. If there are millions of universes, billions of universes, or even an infinite amount of universes, miracles like people walking on water will happen in some of these universes. And this one could be one of them. And then just one to finish, which just makes me chuckle a little bit. What about us being in a computer simulator? Okay, it's not really a tough question against Islam or anything, but it's something. It's about science, and there are many scientific intellectuals that would say that religion is outdated, superstitious, etc., who still give credence to the idea that we could be living in a computer simulator. This is literally a secular way of saying that we basically believe in God. Okay, right. I'll say that I actually do believe that we live in a computer simulator, right? And in this computer simulator, the computer or the computer programmer, but the computer, right, rewards good behavior to certain computer programs and punishes bad behavior towards other computer programs. Some of these rewards and punishments will happen right now in this particular computer simulation, in this particular level, but soon all the programs will be rebooted and transferred to another level, and this other computer level will either be amazing, it will be beautiful, like a simulation, that the programs, we're all computer programs, that the programs really enjoy, or it will be horrible. It will be a simulation where the consciousness of the computer programs really suffers, right? Oh, and as it's a computer simulation, miracles can obviously exist. And I mean, it's surprising that they don't happen more often. Okay. So yeah, I hope you find this interesting. I hope you have enjoyed this little series. I'm super mad busy these days. But yeah, I just had to record this one really. So as always, please leave your comments and thoughts below. And assalamu alaikum to everybody. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of the summer. Take care of yourselves.